Have you ever noticed how the most grounded people in a room rarely raise their voice? They don't try to convince. They don't explain. They simply retreat, and the atmosphere shifts. Suddenly, others pay more attention. Questions surface. Emotions stir. What changed wasn't the volume. It was the absence. Now imagine if you did the same. What would happen if, instead of reacting instantly, you paused? If you chose stillness over impulse, space over justification, silence over explanation? Most of us are taught from childhood that being available, responsive, and agreeable is a virtue. We're praised when we say yes, even when it hurts. We're seen as kind when we put others first, even if it means abandoning ourselves in the process. But what if this availability, this constant readiness, isn't noble at all, but a trap? When you're always available, emotionally, physically, mentally, you become predictable. And what's predictable becomes usable. People begin to treat you like a tool, there when needed, silent when not. You become their emotional first aid kit, their crisis counselor, their validator, their distraction. Not because they love you, but because they love what you offer them. And that's the distinction that changes everything. You see, when you say yes reflexively, when you reply to messages even when you're exhausted, when you explain yourself even when no explanation is owed, when you keep peace at the cost of your own, it's not kindness. It's self-erasure. And the price is steep: emotional fatigue, a fog of confusion, a deep emptiness that can't quite be named. Carl Jung had a name for this dynamic. He called it the persona, the mask we wear to be liked, accepted, or needed. But the more we live through this mask, the further we drift from who we really are. Every quick reply, every forced smile, every effort to be agreeable chips away at our authenticity. We become what others expect, not what we are. But here's the truth: silence is not weakness. Withdrawal is not surrender. In the right context, they are acts of power. When you stop being emotionally accessible to anyone at any time, something radical happens: the world begins to panic. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because you've upset the system. The people who depended on your compliance, your quick reactions, your emotional availability, no longer have access. And that terrifies them. It's not your presence they valued. It's the function you served. And when you stop serving it, they react. They get irritated. They criticize. They call you cold, changed, or distant. But these reactions are not about you. They're the echoes of their discomfort, because they can no longer control you. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming a whole, autonomous self, begins when we stop playing roles and start reclaiming our energy. He spoke of psychic energy as the most vital force we have. Every thought, every emotion, every reaction consumes it. And if we're not intentional, it gets siphoned away by others. Think about it: how often have you spent hours obsessing over what someone said, or what you should have said back? How many nights have you lost sleep trying to decode someone's behavior? That's psychic energy, drained, with nothing in return. We think we're helping by staying involved. We think we're being kind by always responding. But in truth, we're just leaking. We're giving parts of ourselves away, to people, situations, dramas, that don't deserve that access. And here lies the pivot: what if you chose to guard that energy? What if you stopped responding to every provocation, every text, every passive-aggressive nudge? You'd become mysterious, unreadable, sovereign, and yes, unavailable. But that's not a weakness. It's a boundary. One that reclaims your time, your mental peace, your dignity. The truth is, people don't value what is free and abundant. And when you're always there, ready to help, explain, soothe, you become emotionally inexpensive. You become background noise. But when you pull back, when you say no, when you stay silent, when you don't explain, suddenly, your presence becomes felt. Your words carry weight. Your attention becomes earned. And yet, stepping back is not easy. The world has conditioned you to believe that your worth is tied to your accessibility. That love must be proven through sacrifice. That silence equals disconnection. But nothing could be further from the truth. Real connection doesn't require constant availability. It requires authenticity. And authenticity begins when you learn to sit with yourself, without apology, and simply be. Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." So ask yourself, who gets angry when you don't react? Who becomes uncomfortable when you're no longer explaining, pleasing, or showing up on command? These reactions don't reflect your failure, they reveal the truth about them. They show who was truly connected to you, and who was only connected to what you provided. And that's a painful realization. Because when you finally stop reacting, you might lose people. You might lose relationships, roles, even identities you've carried for years. But in their place, you gain something far more precious: clarity, sovereignty, peace. This is not a call to shut down emotionally. It's a call to become conscious in your engagement. To stop offering pieces of yourself to those who haven't earned your presence. To realize that being unavailable is not about rejection, it's about discernment. Because when you protect your energy, you don't become cold. You become powerful. You don't become distant. You become deliberate. And in that deliberateness, you begin to rediscover the strength you've always had, but forgot, because you were too busy explaining yourself to people who never truly listened. So the question now is not, how can I please them? The question is, who truly deserves me? We'll explore that more deeply in the next part, because understanding the source of your reactions, and learning to guard your inner world, is the next vital step on the Stoic path. What truly drains us is not the external world, but the invisible ways in which we hand our energy over to it. Every impulsive reply, every emotional outburst, every attempt to justify ourselves to someone who doesn't even listen, these are not innocent habits. They are leaks. And if we don't learn to seal them, we risk becoming hollow shells, emotionally exhausted, mentally scattered, and spiritually off course. Carl Jung didn't see the human mind as a sterile processor of information. He saw it as a living energy system. Your thoughts, your emotions, your reactions, they are all transactions of psychic energy. Every time you respond to something that doesn't deserve your attention, you spend a currency you didn't realize was finite. And here's the critical point: the energy you spend does not always return. Especially when it's wasted on emotional drama, false friendships, or performative obligations. Think back to the last time you got caught in a meaningless argument. You told yourself it was important to stand your ground, to explain your point, to make them see. But what did it cost you? An hour of peace? A night of sleep? A week of emotional unrest? And what did it give you? Likely nothing of value, only more exhaustion, more internal chaos. You see, psychic energy isn't just a poetic metaphor, it's your life force. And people who don't know how to guard it end up being drained not because they are weak, but because they are leaking everywhere. And here's the cruel irony: those who are most emotionally depleted are often the ones who give the most. They care too much, react too quickly, try too hard. But no one teaches them that their empathy, their presence, their emotional labor must be managed like a resource, not handed out like free samples on a street corner. Jung warned us, that which you resist persists. The more you react, the more energy you pour into a situation, the more power it gains over you. The less you protect your center, the easier it is for the world to spin you. And the world is watching. People who manipulate for attention or control don't need to raise their voice. They just need to find your weak point, your trigger, and press. Again and again. Because they know you'll respond. They know your pattern. And they know that every response gives them more control. So what's the solution? It begins with knowing yourself so deeply that no one can hijack your emotional system without your permission. It begins with identifying the patterns, those exact moments when you lose your center, when you feel that pull to respond instantly, to fix, to please, to correct. The Stoics called this prohairesis, the power of choice. It's the space between stimulus and response, the sacred pause where your freedom lives. When you're not ruled by the world's noise, you gain clarity. You begin to act with intention, rather than react from habit. But this clarity often comes at a cost. You'll start to notice how many interactions are based on your availability, not your humanity. How many people reach out only when they need something? How few can hold space for your silence? When you begin conserving your energy, you will also begin exposing relationships built on one-sided emotional extraction. This is where things get uncomfortable. Because the moment you stop playing your usual role, the helpful one, the always there one, the fixer, others will panic. They'll say you've changed. That you're cold. That you're selfish. But what they're really saying is, you're no longer serving my needs. Let that sink in. What they call selfish is often just your first taste of freedom. Freedom from being a reaction machine. Freedom from being emotionally outsourced. Freedom from playing a role you never chose, but got trapped in. And here's where Jung's idea of projections becomes powerful. People don't just interact with you. They interact with their image of you. Their version. Their expectations. And the more emotionally available you are, the easier it is for them to cast those projections onto you. You become their therapist, their parent, their hero, their villain, whatever role makes them feel safer or more in control. You know that friend who only calls during a crisis. That partner who disappears until they need comfort. That colleague who praises your work, then loads you with tasks. They're not relating to you. They're relating to a character you've unknowingly agreed to play. But why do we agree? Because we fear rejection. We crave acceptance. We don't want to disappoint. So we wear the mask, play the role, keep saying yes, and we call it love. But it's not love. It's dependency dressed as loyalty. It's fear disguised as kindness. And that fear is the true manipulator. Because here's the thing, manipulators don't need to control you outright. They just need you to keep reacting the same way. They rely on your guilt, your people-pleasing instincts, your need to explain yourself. They don't bind you with chains. They bind you with expectations, and your compliance is the key. But when you stop reacting, when you begin to observe instead of engage, the entire structure starts to crack. You start saying no. You stop justifying. You remain silent. You walk away without a monologue. And suddenly, the mask shatters. They no longer know who you are, because the version they controlled no longer exists. And that makes them deeply uncomfortable. But that discomfort, it's their mirror, not your fault. It reflects back everything they didn't want to see about themselves, their need for control, their emotional dependence, their projection games. Your unavailability doesn't make you cruel. It makes them confront their own emptiness. And not everyone is ready for that. So yes, you will be misunderstood. You will be judged. You will be called distant or arrogant. But remember this, what they interpret as distance is often just boundaries. What they call arrogance is often just self-respect. And what they perceive as silence is your energy returning home. That's what makes silence such a powerful force. Not because it hurts others, but because it heals you. It breaks the cycle. It dismantles the unspoken contracts that say, you must always be here for me, no matter what. When you stop reacting, you stop feeding those contracts. And yes, the silence will be uncomfortable, at first. But within that silence is a doorway, the threshold of transformation, where the external world loosens its grip and you begin to hear the quiet voice of your inner self. In the next part, we'll walk through that doorway. We'll explore how to use silence not as an escape, but as a sacred weapon, a space of inner clarity, untouchable by chaos, built not from avoidance but from power. There is a kind of silence that speaks louder than any argument, more piercing than any scream. It's not passive, nor is it born from fear. This silence is a decision, a conscious retreat from noise, a refusal to waste energy where it will not bloom. It's not absence. It's amplified presence. It's the kind of silence that changes the room, shifts dynamics, unsettles the insecure, and restores the fractured self. In today's world, where instant response is glorified, silence is misunderstood. We're conditioned to explain, reply, defend, clarify. When someone accuses us, we rush to correct. When someone questions us, we hurry to provide context. When someone pulls away, we chase with apologies. But in doing so, we miss the opportunity to let silence work for us. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He didn't see silence as a void. He saw it as fertile ground. It's the soil where individuation takes root, where we begin to separate who we truly are from who we were trained to be. And that process begins not in talking, but in pausing. Have you ever noticed how some people panic when you don't respond? When you don't text back, when you don't explain yourself, when you simply disappear? That panic isn't about missing you. It's about losing control. Because as long as you're explaining, you're still in the game. But silence breaks the rules. Silence declares, I'm no longer playing by your terms. And that is power. True silence isn't cowardice. It's clarity. It doesn't lash out, but neither does it beg. It doesn't seek to win the argument, it simply exits the room and lets the noise echo into itself. Silence says, you no longer have access to my energy. And when you withhold that access, people are forced to confront something terrifying, themselves. You see, your constant reactions once served as a mirror for others. They knew how to get a rise out of you, how to push the right buttons. But the moment you stop reacting, their reflection disappears. They can no longer locate themselves in your emotional landscape. And without that map, they get lost. This is why silence often provokes so much drama. Not because you're doing harm, but because you've stopped playing your part in someone else's projection. And now they have to sit with the emptiness they've been avoiding. Jung said, we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Silence forces that confrontation. It withdraws the distractions, the noise, the soothing lies, and leaves only what's real. The patterns. The wounds. The truth. It is in silence that we begin to see, clearly, maybe for the first time. We notice the loops we were stuck in. The emotional games we called love. The manipulation we mistook for connection. We see how much of our life was dictated not by intention, but by reaction. But silence doesn't just reveal, it rebuilds. At first, that silence is brutal. It feels like abandonment. Like you're losing everyone and everything. You're misunderstood. Accused. Painted as arrogant, uncaring, cold. But slowly, the chaos outside fades. The accusations become echoes. The opinions lose weight. And then something strange and beautiful begins to happen. Clarity. Where there was once confusion, there's space. Where there was anxiety, there's calm. Where there was neediness, there's sovereignty. And in that space, you begin to reclaim something that's been slipping through your fingers for years, your energy. You start to notice how much of your power was spent trying to fix other people, trying to be understood by those unwilling to understand, trying to explain yourself to those who only wanted to maintain control. And now, you're no longer playing that game. You're watching it from the outside, and realizing you never had to play it in the first place. This is the sacred silence, the one that no longer needs to be justified. It's not a punishment. It's not a tactic. It's not emotional warfare. It's alignment. A sign that you're finally beginning to listen to yourself louder than you listen to the world. It will cost you things, make no mistake. You'll lose relationships that were built on your compliance. You'll become incomprehensible to people who only saw you as a role, not a person. You'll have fewer conversations, fewer explanations, fewer likes. But what you gain is unmatched, peace that doesn't depend on anyone's opinion. A presence that doesn't shrink to fit someone's comfort. And most importantly, yourself. Because when you no longer spend your energy proving who you are, you finally start being who you are. And you'll realize something else, too: you don't owe anyone your energy. Not your time. Not your attention. Not your reaction. You don't need to be on all the time. You don't need to show up for people who won't show up for you. You don't need to perform emotional labor just to maintain appearances. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is, nothing. Not because you're weak, but because you've realized your worth doesn't live in your availability. It lives in your essence. And that essence needs space to breathe, to grow, to evolve, away from the noise, the guilt, the chaos. So yes, choose silence. But choose it with awareness. Not to escape, but to elevate. Not to punish, but to protect. Not to abandon others, but to return to yourself. This is not withdrawal from the world. It's re-entry into your soul. And in the next part, we'll dive deeper into what happens after the silence settles. What life looks like when you no longer chase, no longer perform, no longer explain. What it means to become selective, not out of fear, but from deep self-respect. Because when you begin choosing where your energy goes, you begin choosing who you become. There comes a moment in your journey when silence stops feeling like absence and starts becoming a sanctuary. What once felt like rejection now feels like protection. The space that once echoed with self-doubt now resonates with clarity. You begin to see that what you feared was loneliness was actually the beginning of sovereignty. When you stop giving your energy to everyone who demands it, something shifts. You stop being everyone's solution, everyone's comfort, everyone's sounding board. And though it feels disorienting at first, as if you're failing some unspoken social obligation, you begin to understand, you were never meant to be available to everyone. You were meant to be selective. Selective with your energy. Your time. Your boundaries. Your soul. Because not everyone deserves access to you. Not everyone has earned the right to hear your truth, to share your space, to occupy your mind. This is where the practice of conscious unavailability begins. It's not cruelty. It's not arrogance. It's not an excuse to detach and dismiss. It's a decision, a calm, grounded, intentional refusal to allow yourself to be drained by the unworthy and the unaware. In a world that glorifies instant replies, constant updates, and endless access, saying, "Not now," or "I'm not available," feels like rebellion. But it's not rebellion, it's realignment. It's what happens when you realize that your peace is worth more than your people-pleasing. Jung understood this form of sacred isolation. He called it a necessary phase in the process of individuation. A time when you detach from the collective voice, from societal roles, and turn inward, not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. Because the deeper truth is this: you can't truly become yourself while you're still addicted to being understood by everyone else. And that addiction is subtle. It wears the mask of kindness, of duty, of connection. But when you trace it back, you'll often find fear at the root, fear of rejection, abandonment, misunderstanding. So you over-explain. You say yes when you mean no. You answer the phone when you're exhausted. You join conversations that drain you. All for the illusion of closeness. But real closeness doesn't require you to betray yourself. In fact, any connection that demands you abandon your peace is not a connection, it's a transaction. And as you pull back from these transactions, you'll notice a pattern: people will start to reveal who they really are. Some will accept your silence. Others will resent it. Some will disappear. Others will push harder, pressuring you to explain, to return, to be the old you again. But you're not the old you anymore. You're someone who's beginning to understand the cost of self-betrayal. Someone who is no longer willing to pay that price, no matter how familiar the faces or deep the history. You're learning that boundaries are not walls to keep people out, they're doors that require discernment about who gets to enter. And it's here, in this phase of life, that the art of silence matures. No longer a weapon, no longer a shield, now it becomes a compass. A tool of precision. You use it to observe, to feel, to sense what is worthy of your attention and what is not. You begin to distinguish between conversations that nourish you and ones that deplete you. Between invitations that align with your truth and ones that only serve to drag you back into old versions of yourself. You become less reactive. Not because you don't care, but because you care too much to waste yourself. This is emotional discipline. The kind that doesn't look impressive on the outside. No one applauds when you turn off your phone instead of arguing. No one celebrates when you decline an invitation to protect your peace. But in the quiet, something sacred is forming. A new way of being. A new sense of self-worth that is no longer built on performance or approval, but on presence. It's no longer about saying yes to everything. It's about learning to say yes to yourself, and letting that yes take precedence over all else. That might look like leaving a conversation halfway through because it turned toxic. It might look like reading a message and deciding not to respond, not because you're rude, but because it doesn't serve your energy. It might look like walking away from a relationship where you're only loved when you're convenient. And yes, it will look like selfishness to some. That's fine. Let them misunderstand. Let them project. Let them call you cold, distant, or arrogant. Because in truth, you're becoming whole. And wholeness is threatening to those who only knew how to engage with your wounds. But the most transformative moment will come when you no longer feel the need to explain any of this. When you no longer draft long texts trying to make someone see your perspective. When you no longer shrink to fit their expectations. When your silence is not tension, but trust. Trust in yourself. Trust in the boundaries you've set. Trust that those who are meant to walk with you will never require you to abandon your peace to stay close. So now ask yourself honestly, who in your life respects your silence? Who honors your time? Who listens to your no without making you feel guilty? These are your people. The rest are lessons. And it's okay to walk away from a lesson once you've learned what it came to teach you. Because your energy is not infinite. Your peace is not negotiable. Your time is not disposable. And your presence, your true presence, is sacred. In the final part, we will step into what this path ultimately leads to, the solitude of the strong. A kind of freedom that comes not from isolation, but from inner integrity. A life where you no longer chase, no longer justify, no longer compromise your center. A life where you become not just unavailable, but unshakable. In the beginning, silence felt like a loss. Pulling away felt like punishment. Choosing solitude felt like failure. You wondered, am I being too harsh? Too distant? Too much? But over time, the noise settled. The doubts quieted. And in that stillness, something began to rise. Not just peace. Not just clarity. But power, the kind you don't have to prove. The kind that doesn't need applause. The kind that comes from finally belonging to yourself. When you stop being constantly available to everyone, a profound transformation begins. First comes the discomfort, like you've broken an ancient rule. Then comes the guilt. Then the accusations, you've changed. You're selfish. You think you're better than us. But eventually, the drama fades, the chaos quiets, and in its place emerges something extraordinary. You. Not the version shaped by others' needs. Not the persona molded to be acceptable. Not the identity built to keep peace. Just you. Whole. Present. Unshaken. This is the solitude of the strong. It's not lonely. It's not hollow. It's not a sad, empty room. It's a space filled with your own presence, steady, grounded, and alive. And when you finally taste this kind of solitude, you realize you were never afraid of being alone. You were afraid of being alone with someone you didn't know, yourself. But now you do. You've sat through the silence. You've endured the withdrawal. You've survived the rejection. And now, you see what was always waiting beneath the noise, your truth. Your essence. Your voice. This is what the Stoics meant by living according to nature, not the nature imposed by culture or conformity, but your inner nature. Your deepest self, unfiltered, unconvinced, uncompromising. It's not the loudest life. It's not the most popular. But it is the most powerful. Because now, you're no longer at the mercy of others' perceptions. You don't need validation to act. You don't need applause to rest. You don't need constant connection to feel complete. You've become selective, not out of fear, but from discernment. You no longer chase. You choose. And what you choose now reflects a higher standard. You no longer enter conversations that cost your peace. You no longer explain your no to people who never honored your yes. You no longer entertain the kind of relationships where being understood is conditional on being compliant. You've outgrown the hunger for approval. Because now, your presence is not for sale. And your absence. It's not a threat. It's a declaration. A reminder that your time is earned, not expected. That your silence is not a void to be filled, but a boundary to be respected. You're no longer willing to be drained, used, or misunderstood as a requirement for love. The relationships that demand that, let them break. The circles that resent your boundaries, let them close. Because in their place, new people will arrive. People who don't need you to shrink to feel safe. People who understand your silence is not distance, it's depth. They may be fewer. But they will be real. And in the end, that's all you need. Because you've discovered something more valuable than external connection. You've discovered inner congruence, where your actions, your values, and your peace finally align. And this alignment becomes your compass. You move not out of reaction, but from center. You speak only when your words are rooted in truth. You give only when the offering doesn't cost your soul. You've stopped managing others' emotions at the expense of your own. You've stopped performing peace while secretly screaming inside. You've stopped being available to everyone, and started being fully available to yourself. And yes, there will be moments of doubt. Moments when the old patterns whisper again, just answer. Just help. Just say yes. But now you'll recognize that voice for what it is, the echo of a former self who didn't yet know their worth. You've grown beyond that. Now, you breathe before reacting. You pause before replying. You walk away before being pulled into someone else's storm. Not because you're indifferent, but because you're intentional. This is your quiet revolution. No fireworks. No dramatic exits. Just fewer words, fewer wounds, and far more wisdom. And as this journey unfolds, you'll find that your energy, once scattered, is now gathered. Focused. Directed only toward what matters. Only toward what aligns. That is freedom. And it is the kind of freedom that cannot be bought, borrowed, or faked. It must be earned, through silence, through stillness, through standing alone until your presence no longer depends on who stays or who leaves. And if you've made it here, truly made it, then you already know. This isn't the end of something. It's the beginning. A life where you are no longer just available. You are unmistakable. You are sovereign. You are free.